The folder said rejected, insufficient credentials. Not the project, not the proposal. Her name. Yolanda Prest had printed it herself. No, wait. The HR coordinator at Callaway and Voss Architecture had printed it, had slid it across the conference table with 2 fingers like it was something she didn't want to touch, and had said without looking up, "We only consider candidates from accredited 4-year program. Community college doesn't qualify." Then she'd turned back to her computer. That was the rule. Mira Devane had heard it before she even sat down. She picked up the folder, her own portfolio, her own work, and walked back out through the glass lobby. The receptionist didn't look at her either. Nobody did. A woman in a tailored blazer held the elevator door open for a man carrying coffee. Neither of them made room for Mira. She took the stairs. Outside, the Chicago wind hit her like a correction. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the portfolio under her arm, watching the building's reflection slide across the glass front of the one across the street. 42 floors of steel and curtain wall and cantilever detail. She knew who'd designed it. She knew which load calculations had been revised in the 3rd round. She knew because she'd read every public filing, every permit application, every material spec sheet she could get her hands on, because that was what she did instead of sleeping. She was 26 years old. She had been doing this since she was 19. Her mother, Cecile, worked the overnight shift at a hotel laundry on the South Side. Not management, not front desk. The room where the machines ran so loud you couldn't hear yourself think, where the steam came up through the floor grates and turned your hair to something wild by 2 in the morning. Cecile had worked that shift for 11 years, so that Mira could take the bus to the community college 3 miles away and take every course they offered in structural design, in drafting, in architectural history, in construction law. When Mira ran out of courses, she started over and took them again, this time as a tutor. She had passed the RA licensing exam sections, all 6 of them, on the first attempt. She had not, however, graduated from a 4-year program. The firm on Michigan Avenue didn't care about the exams. The firm in the West Loop had been polite about it, a nice letter, good stationery, but the answer was the same. The boutique firm in Pilsen had interviewed her for 40 minutes before someone Googled the name of her school. And the conversation stopped. She had learned, over time, that there was a version of the architecture world where what you built mattered, and a version where you'd been credentialed mattered more, and that those 2 worlds did not overlap as much as people liked to pretend. What she built, in the meantime, was other people's things. She did permit drawings for a contractor named Bautista, who paid her by the hour, cash. She did code compliance reviews for a property management company that didn't ask where she'd studied. She did, on one occasion, draft the structural renovation plans for a 3-flat building in Bridgeport, completely correctly, stamped by a licensed engineer who reviewed her work and said, quietly, "I've never had to change anything you send me." He did not offer her a job. He said he was sorry. He looked like he meant it. The portfolio under her arm had 47 pages. She had designed a library, a transit shelter, a mixed-income housing block with passive ventilation and a green roof that would have cut energy costs by 31%. None of it had been built. All of it was real. She took the bus home. On the bus, she sat next to a man who was reading a newspaper, which almost nobody did anymore, and the paper was open to the business section, and there was a photograph of a building she recognized. Not because she'd seen it. It hadn't been built yet, because she had designed it, or something very close to it. The article was about Aldrich Sohn, the principal architect at Sohn Meridian, a mid-sized firm with offices in Chicago and Atlanta. The project was called the Tillman Community Health Campus, a 3-building development on the South Side, publicly funded, intended to serve one of the most underserved zip codes in the city. The article quoted Sohn as saying the project represented a new commitment to design-forward community investment. The rendering in the photograph had her green roof, her passive ventilation stack, the angled clerestory windows that she had spent 3 weeks calculating the optimal orientation for, based on solar data for that specific latitude. She didn't know Aldrich Sohn. She had never met him. She had submitted a proposal to the Tillman Community Health Authority 8 months ago in response to an open call for design concepts and had received an automated acknowledgement and then nothing. She had assumed it hadn't made it past the first round. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked out the window at the street signs and figured out she was 3 stops past her street. She didn't do anything dramatic. That was the thing about Mira Devane. She was not a dramatic person. Her mother had raised her to be precise, to be documented, to be the kind of person who could prove what she'd done when she'd done it. And to whom? She went home. She made tea. She sat at the folding table she used as a desk in the apartment she shared with her cousin's family, and she opened her laptop, and she pulled up every file she had from the Tillman proposal. She had submitted on October 14th. She had the submission confirmation email. She had a PDF of the full proposal package, 43 pages, including the concept narrative, the site analysis, the sustainability calculations, and the schematic drawings. She had the file metadata, showing date created, date modified, date exported. She had her sketchbook photos, time-stamped on her phone, going back 14 months. She had the solar orientation calculations in a spreadsheet with formulas. Passive stack ventilation rationale in a 6-page technical memo. The green roof specification with 3 alternative product options and cost estimates. Aldrich Soane's rendering had her numbers, not inspired by, not similar to, her numbers. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call anyone. She made a folder on her desktop called Documentation, and she started putting things in it, in order. And she did not stop until 2 in the morning, when the folder had 31 items and she had cross-referenced every one of them against the details visible in the Soane Meridian renderings from the article. 14 direct correspondences. Not aesthetic. Technical. A passive ventilation stack height of 4.2 meters. A clerestory angle of 23 degrees. A green roof assembly with a specific drainage coefficient that she had calculated for Chicago's average rainfall data. Those were not design choices. Those were math. And the math was hers. The public hearing for the Tillman campus project was scheduled for 3 weeks later. It was a City of Chicago community development hearing, open to the public, recorded. Aldrich Soane would be presenting the design to the alderman's office, the health authority board, and a panel of community stakeholders. There would be other architects present. There would be city engineers. Mira requested a speaker slot. She was told the public comment period allowed 3 minutes per speaker. She said 3 minutes was fine. She wore her mother's good coat. Cecile had wanted to come. Mira had told her not to. She knew what her mother's face looked like when she was afraid, and she didn't want to be watching that face when she needed to be watching the room. The hearing was held in a building on West 63rd Street, a municipal space with fluorescent lights and folding chairs and a long table at the front where the panel sat. About 40 people in the room. Half of them were there for an earlier agenda item. Soane came in with 2 associates and a printed presentation binder. He was somewhere in his 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of man who wore architect glasses and knew it. He shook hands with 3 people at the front table before he sat down. He did not look at the rows of public seating. Mira sat in the 3rd row with her folder in her lap. The presentation took 22 minutes. Soane spoke with the ease of someone who had done this many times, who understood how to hold a room with technical language without losing the non-technical people in it. He was good. She could acknowledge that. He walked through the health campus concept, the community clinic, the wellness center, the outdoor gathering space. And he talked about the sustainability features with a confidence that made it sound like he'd arrived at them through a long process of careful thought. The 4.2-meter ventilation stack. The 23-degree clerestory. The green roof with the Chicago rainfall coefficient. A woman 2 seats to Mira's left whispered to the man beside her, "Is that the right height for a stack like that?" The man shrugged. He's the architect. When the public comment period opened, Mira stood up. She said her name. She said she was a licensed candidate architect with a practice in Chicago. She said she had submitted a design proposal to the Tillman Community Health Authority on October 14th of the previous year, and that she had become aware that several technical specifications from that proposal appeared in the Soane Meridian presentation. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something has happened that people haven't processed yet. Soane looked at her for the first time. She opened her folder and began to read. She had exactly 3 minutes. She used every second. She cited the passive stack height, 4.2 meters, derived from a specific airflow calculation for a building of this footprint and the prevailing south-southwest wind pattern at this site. She cited the clerestory angle, 23 degrees, derived from solar altitude data for Chicago at 41.8 degrees north latitude, optimized for winter gain and summer shading. She cited the green roof drainage coefficient, 0.3, derived from Chicago's 90th percentile rainfall event data, cross-referenced against the specific membrane assembly she had specified. She said, "These are not design preferences. They are mathematical outputs of site-specific calculations. The probability of two independent designers arriving at identical numerical values for all three through independent processes is not something I would ask this panel to accept without documentation." She said, "I have that documentation." She said, "I am prepared to share it with anyone in this room." Then her 3 minutes were up. She sat down. The room was very still. One of the city engineers at the panel table, a woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, was writing something. She wrote for a long time, after Mira stopped speaking. Then she looked up at Aldrich Soane and said, "Mr. Soane, would you like to respond?" Soane said there must be some confusion. He said that his firm had developed the Tillman concept over a period of 14 months. He said that sustainable design specifications of this kind were often convergent, that trained architects working on similar building types in similar climates would naturally arrive at similar numbers. The woman with the reading glasses said, "Similar numbers or identical numbers?" Soane said, "I'd have to review the specifics." She said, "The speaker cited 3 specific values. Are those values in your proposal?" There was a pause. Soane said, "Those values reflect the site conditions." The woman said, "They do. So does the speaker's prior submission, which she says was submitted 8 months before your proposal was developed. Do you have a record of reviewing submissions to the open call?" Soane said, "His firm didn't have direct involvement in the intake process." The woman said, "Who did?" Nobody answered that question in the room, but everybody heard it. The alderman's office representative, a young man who'd been quiet the whole meeting, leaned over and said something to the health authority board member beside him. The board member picked up a pen and wrote something on the cover of his agenda packet. Mira sat with her hands folded in her folder in her lap. She was not performing calm. She was calm. She had been living with this knowledge for 3 weeks, and she had made her peace with every possible outcome before she walked in the door. Whatever happened next, the documentation existed. The numbers were in the record. The hearing was recorded. She had done what she came to do. What happened next took 4 months. She didn't talk about it much in those 4 months. Her cousin's wife asked her once how it was going, and Mira said slowly and left it at that. Cecile asked her once if she was sleeping, and Mira said enough, which was not quite the same thing, but wasn't exactly a lie. The city initiated a review of the Tillman proposal intake process. It emerged that the open call submissions had been reviewed by a consulting committee that included a former associate of Soane Meridian, a connection that had not been disclosed. It emerged that Mira's submission had been logged as received, but had not been formally entered into the evaluation record. A clerical error, the health authority said initially. Then, a processing oversight. Then, when a local journalist started asking questions, the language changed. Soane Meridian withdrew from the Tillman campus project in the 3rd month. In the 4th month, the Tillman Community Health Authority sent Mira a letter. It was formal and careful and written by someone with a legal background, but what it said underneath all of that was this: the design process was being restarted. An independent review panel had been formed. Her original submission was being entered into the record as a priority candidate. Would she be willing to present? She read the letter twice at the folding table desk. Then she called her mother. Cecile picked up on the 2nd ring the way she always did, even when she'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift, even at 7 in the morning with the laundry machine still ringing in her ears. Mira said, "They want to see the work." There was a silence. Then Cecile said, "Baby, they were always going to see the work." As if she had known this the whole time. As if there had never been any real question. Maybe there hadn't. Maybe Mira had always known too, in the place where the math lived, the part of her brain that didn't do anxiety or drama or what-ifs, the part that just looked at a problem and worked it until the numbers came out clean. The presentation was held in the same room on West 63rd Street, same fluorescent lights, same folding chairs, different panel. This one with 2 independent structural engineers, a sustainability consultant from the University of Illinois, and a community representative from the Tillman neighborhood herself. A woman named Mrs. Oduya, who had lived 4 blocks from the proposed site for 38 years, and who sat at the center of the table with her hands folded and her eyes on Mira from the moment she walked in. Mira had 45 minutes. She used 43. She walked them through the site analysis first. The demographics, the health outcomes data, the transit access, the existing built environment. She talked about why passive ventilation mattered for this population specifically. Older residents with respiratory conditions, a community that had been living near industrial corridors for decades and had a different relationship with air quality than the panels and committees usually understood. She talked about it like someone who had read everything and then gone and stood on the site at 7 in the morning to watch which way the wind moved. She talked about the green roof not as an aesthetic or a LEED checkbox, but as a stormwater management intervention for a block that had flooding issues every spring. She had the city's drainage records. She had photographs. She had a cost-benefit analysis showing that the upfront investment would save the health authority an estimated $40,000 in deferred maintenance over 15 years. She showed the clerestory calculations on a projected slide and walked through them step by step, slowly, because she wanted the engineers to follow the math in real time. She wanted them to see that she hadn't looked these numbers up. She had derived them. The sustainability consultant from U of I had a question about the membrane specification. Mira answered it. He asked a follow-up. She answered that too. He wrote something in his notes and did not look up for a moment. When she finished, Mrs. Oduya said, "How long have you been working on this?" Mira said, "The proposal, 14 months. The problem." She stopped for a second. "The problem is the neighborhood where I grew up, so most of my life." Mrs. Oduya nodded once, the way people do when something confirms what they already believed. The independent review panel recommended Mira Devane's design for the Tillman Community Health Campus in a 6-page report issued 6 weeks later. The report cited the technical rigor of the original proposal, the site-specific sustainability strategy, and what the panel called a depth of contextual knowledge of the community that was evident throughout the design rationale. The Health Authority Board voted 4-1 to accept the recommendation. The one dissenting vote was a procedural objection, having to do with the selection process, not the design. It was noted in the record and did not change the outcome. The project broke ground 14 months after that. It was a Tuesday in October. The same month Mira had submitted her original proposal 3 years earlier. She stood at the edge of the site in a hard hat and watched the first excavator break the ground, and she thought about her mother in the hotel laundry, about the machines that ran all night, about every bus she had taken in the dark to get to a class that cost her $180 a semester at a school that the architecture firms didn't count. She thought about the folder in her lap in that hearing room. The 3 minutes, the numbers. Cecile was there that morning, at the edge of the site. She had taken the morning off. The first weekday morning off, Mira could remember in years. She was wearing her good coat, the one she'd lent Mira for the hearing. She stood beside her daughter and didn't say anything for a while, just watched the machinery move. Then she said quietly, "I always knew what you were." The excavator kept moving. The ground opened up. Beneath the grass and the packed clay and the old city infrastructure was the foundation of what would become, in 3 years, a building that would serve this neighborhood for decades. A building designed to breathe, designed to collect water and use light and move air the way this specific place, at this specific latitude, needed it to. The math had always been right. It just needed somewhere to land. Some people spend their whole lives being told that where they came from disqualifies them from where they're trying to go. They get used to carrying their proof everywhere, in folders, in spreadsheets, in the quiet parts of themselves that don't argue back, just document. Mira Devane carried hers for 3 years before the room was ready to look at it. Not because the work wasn't good enough. It was always good enough. The room just needed to be the right room, and eventually it was.